Can everybody in the back hear me? Yay, thank you. Can everybody on Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to take a moment and just put you all on gallery view so that I can see you. If you're on Zoom, just take a moment and put your camera on so I can see you all. We'll feel that connection. If you could all be in my space, all the little cameras are coming on now. It's very, very nice. So here's what I'll say before I begin my sermon. I have missed terribly being together. And, last year, boy, did we were, I'm going to use the word heroic in setting up that tent, but it's different than being together right here in this sacred space. And I have to tell you how nice it is to see everybody here, to see everybody on Zoom. At the end of my sermons, I will often, at this sermon, thank my family. I'm going to do it at the beginning. I am so happy that my in-laws are here. My mom is on Zoom, taking care of my dad. My wife is here, the best wife in the world. What a blessing. Emily's on this screen somewhere too. And Ethan is at services at Haverford, at Hillel, at Chabad. And I'm sure that it is the longest service he's ever experienced in his life. So we will wish him a Shana Tova as well. I'm a very blessed man. I'm blessed with all of you. I read an important book this summer that I want you to put on your list, if you will. It's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. Has anybody read the book, by the way? One of you. It's a really good book. You're going to say thank you for recommending it, Rabbi. The book asks us to confront a fact that life is absurdly brief. He calculated that if you live to be 80, you'll have lived about 4,000 weeks. And his point was to jolt us. He went around, how many weeks do you think we have? And everybody yes, much more. 4,000 isn't a lot. Time passes so quick. And I have to confess that as I even picked up the book, as I read his introduction, it made me a little queasy. I did my own math in my head. How many of those weeks I've lived of the 4,000? Lots. And the implication is that only a few remain. By the way, and I know those of you who are older than me says, you think you have just a few remaining. And I have to tell you that confronting life's brevity can be so sobering because life feels fragile, and it is. We want more time. We want more security, and we know that it isn't there, that things can change in a moment. So why do this? Here's what I think is a beautiful piece of Judaism. It says you have to. It asks us to confront that resistance that I'm articulating. You have to name it. You have to think about it. And I'm going to suggest that prayer is different than most of us perceive it. A piece of what prayer is it's saying to you, confront what's important about life. And in this case, confronting fragility may be one of the most important things that we can do. We have to overcome that propensity to deny, to avoid. And as we begin to accept difficult truths, that knowledge changes us. It influences us, and we behave differently. And today I want to talk about that. As I read his book, I kept thinking about the prayer Unatana Tokef, because that's exactly what that prayer does. It says, confront life's brevity, that powerful, haunting prayer that we'll recite just a few minutes after I finish my sermon. It says, think about life's fragility, not to be morose, but so that we can live differently. There's the 4 paragraphs to the prayer. You'll note it differently this year. The last paragraph is the one that we often don't look at, but it names fragility. It says, we are like a fragile vessel. We're like grass that withers, the shadow that passes, the cloud that vanishes, the wind that blows, the dust that floats, the dream that flies away. Jewish wisdom says, acknowledge, reflect upon, and learn from fragility. Psychologist Susan David wrote, life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. Life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. She's right. As we face fragility with clear eyes, with honesty, it allows us to live more fully. And that's what this holiday is about. I know that I would get caught up in several pieces of the Unatana Tokef that pulled me away from that theme. I get caught up in that list. Who shall live and who shall die? Who by fire, who by water, who by sword, who by beast? Wow. It's just overwhelming to read that sometimes, even more so in the aftermath of a pandemic where too many have died tragic deaths. I think the prayer is saying it's real. It's real. And that by acknowledging that life can be capricious, we stop hiding. We stop denying. Prayer strips open our hearts, pushing us to think, how do I truly make each day count? Here's what Berkman says in 4,000 Weeks. It's only by facing our finitude that we can step into a truly authentic relationship with life. By the way, that's an extraordinary line. It's only by facing our finitude that we can step into a truly authentic relationship with life. By the way, prayer isn't just reciting words from a book. Prayer is confronting what is real so we can change. Yet prayer gets complicated by theology. I know when I read the Unatana Tokef, the picture of this all-powerful God sitting in heaven, recording our fates based upon our behaviors, is the way that I've always read that prayer for years. By the way, it's in the prayer. You're going to say, look, Rabbi, it's right there. And by the way, it's throughout the Bible. It is, and it causes so much disconnect. It's a faith buster for many. Dissonance and anger. What about all those good people who've died or received devastating diagnoses? Is that a divine decree based upon something we may or may not have done? I have to say, many people of faith, many people say, we can't understand God, but God's God and I am not. That's the response of Job and many others. And there's a piece of me that wants to be able to embrace that fully and always keeps it in my head and heart. It's humble. It's powerful. But there's a part of me that rebels from that theology, that says I simply cannot accept that view of God. And I want to suggest that those two contradictory interpretations of the prayer actually sit side by side, and that another piece of what prayer is the argument that we have with what we read. And it's through the honesty of that argument that we either rewrite prayers or we reinterpret them in ways that they speak to us. I read this prayer much differently now, and I don't think I'm twisting it into what it is not. as I've studied it. I actually want to suggest that the prayer is a much different theology than the old man in the sky writing down capriciously who will live and who will die. When I read the prayer carefully, and I ask you to do that this week, today, it's not God writing down, but it's God reading what we experience. The prayer pictures God opening a book rather than writing a book. And here's what it says. Ume alav yikareh, and God reads from it. And then it says, Chotem yad kol adam bo, everyone's signature is in it. The book of Unetane Tokef, as I read it, is what's happened to us. God's control is limited. God's power isn't to determine our fate. We have free will. There are laws of nature, which means terrible things can happen. It has nothing to do with our character as I read it. But this is about a God who reads. And when you read someone's story, you do it because you care, because you're invested. And when you know that your story is being read, you lift up what's happening to you with an honesty and an integrity, and you know you are cared for. The realities that we have experienced, especially these last few years, they're so real, and they need to be voiced, and they need to be cared about. Fragility is our human condition, that everything that happens is written, and God listens according to this prayer. In my theology, the God who listens, the God who cares but cannot intervene, that's a theology that I can embrace. Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who is an Orthodox rabbi, explains it this way. He's the one who opened the door for me to read it differently. He says, the God of Unetane Tokef has spent the last year stepping back from the world in order to let humans act independently. And those actions become the book of the world, signed by each of us. Fate simply is. By the way, read it carefully. That list of who shall live and who shall die, and all of those possible ways, isn't God deciding. It's the human condition. That list of terrible things that could happen doesn't use the name of God. Who by fire, who by earthquake, who by plague? The answer is me and you. We've seen it and we've lived it, and we need to lift it up. The point of the prayer is for us to confront and feel our mortality and fragility, and to pour out our hearts as we name what is real. And I want to suggest, and I want to ask you to reflect upon the power of naming your truth, the power of sharing your story. I needed Unetane Tokef this year. That feeling of fragility is so real, and I need to name it. By the way, what happens when we name it? And you would say, what does that change? It doesn't change anything. It lets it out. It gives us a chance to process it. We weave our emotions into our story and slowly begin to regain our ground. We start to figure out how to respond when we've named it. We find support, we gain perspective. As we confront what is real, we focus on what is really important. In her book, Bittersweet, another book that I'd really recommend by Susan Cain, she writes that awareness of life's fragility actually brings us strength, wisdom, and even joy. Strength, wisdom, and even joy. She writes about Dr. Laura Karstensen, who's at Stanford, at the Lifespan Development Lab and the Center on Longevity. And she teaches that fragility has the power to help us live in the present, to forgive more easily, to love more deeply, to experience more gratitude and contentment and less stress and anger. By the way, you have to do the work for that to happen. And I would love every person here to say, can I take that fragility that's real for me and figure out how to allow it to give me the perspective so that I can live in the present. I can forgive more easily. I can love more deeply. I can experience more gratitude and contentment and less stress and anger. Think about the impact that can come, the amazingly positive impact that can come through acknowledging, through naming, how that then leads you to develop your humanity more deeply. It means that we have to cultivate perspective, notice and remembering the positive. It means we need to savor the precious. It means we need to embrace compassion. Let fragility change you. Let gratitude grow. As we name it, I think we also become aware of others' fragility. I hope that awareness of this allows us to treat one another with more compassion, being gentler and kind. The fragility can become a bridge that connects us. We all are experiencing this. Think about your book. You're writing a book. Think about God reading that book. Name your fragility. Name it. Allow that fragility that is so real to cause you to focus on what's really important. Here's what prayer is meant to do. Prayer is meant to move us to action. The third part of the Unatana Tokef is the part you always hear me emphasize. The Unatana Tokef says, fate is. The only thing we can control is our response to it. It's an extraordinary line. Shuva tefila utzedaka ma'avirin et ro'a gezerah. Shuva, that sense of turning to our best self. Tefila, lifting up our heart. Turning to divine concepts. Tzedakah, turning to other things. Those don't annul the decree, which is how some prayer books translate it, and it's wrong. It doesn't avert the decree. It transforms the difficult things that we face. What a powerful, powerful teaching. We can transform how we deal with even the most painful of realities. Don't allow prayer to be a mere recitation of words. Let prayer be heart. Let prayer be pouring out what's real. Let prayer be that which you see those words and you interpret and reinterpret them so that they guide and direct you to who you might become. By the way, the power of Ethan being at Chabad is that there's so much heart in those prayers. Often you'll see tears of people who feel those words. Let prayer be an expression of emotions as we confront what we might otherwise deny or overlook. As we integrate our realities into our emerging story. I'm giving you lots of books to read today. Frank Bruni wrote a beautiful book called The Beauty of Dusk. So many of you know he's a journalist. And he's a journalist who is going blind. And he writes about what that's meant for him. He writes as one who was not a particularly religious person. And he found that as a result of what he was going through, he actually was turning to prayer in a different way. Listen to his words. I asked that I not be saddled with more than I could bear, that my back prove sturdy enough to be saddled with a lot. When we name our fragility, we get to name what we would hope our response is. Let me not be saddled with too much. Let me bear what I'm experiencing. Prayer brought awareness that he had the capacity to express his hopes, to face his fragility, to seek perspective. And through prayer, he discovered another aspect of prayer that I would love us to develop more deeply: stillness, quiet, silence. And he said in doing that, he constructed the requisite sense of security. Prayer helped him feel guided by something larger than the sum of his parts, and that brought him peace. Let's allow prayer to create stillness, to listen carefully to moments of silence. As you look at the Unatana Tokef prayer, you'll read that we hear and experience through the great shofar gadol yitaka, and then the kol dmama daka, the still small voice will be heard. Let that small voice, that voice that's whispering to you as you've named your fragility, let it lead you and guide you. That voice is in each one of us. We just need to listen to it. Allow yourself to reframe how you consider prayer. Prayer is not praise to a God who we either don't believe in or doesn't need it. Prayer reminds us of the highest values, so that we change our lives according to those values. Look at this prayer book. It's full of statements of gratitude, of awe, imagining peace, redemption, love, so much else. We dream of what might be, so we can act to make it happen. The Hebrew word for prayer, lehitpalel, means to judge oneself. We encounter what's godly and seek to live that way. Let this book change you. Author Anne Lamott writes, I pray to be a good servant because I've learned that this is the path of happiness. I pray for my family and my sick friends that they may have grace and healing. I end my prayers with, make me ever mindful of the needs of the poor. That's how tefillah transforms the decree. You remember the end of the play Hamilton? Liza Hamilton says, who lives, who dies? I think it was right from this prayer. And then what's her next line? Who tells the story? And you know what Unatana Tokef would say? We tell the story. By the way, she carefully curated the story. There were parts of the story that she excised because she didn't want people to read them. That's not Unatana Tokef. Unatana Tokef says every piece of the story is written and read. It's what happens to us. God reads it. Tell your story. Let the prayer move you to think about, what is my story? What will the next chapters be? How do I transform what I am experiencing? We write our own books. Think about that book. I've been thinking about that book since I've been writing this sermon, and I want to share with you the conclusion of this sermon, which is my prayer that builds on these themes. Dear God, life feels so fragile. I know life is short. Help me treasure each day and each moment. Help me slow down so I truly listen to myself and others and you. Help me embrace the blessings in life that are so plentiful. Open my eyes to see the world with awe and compassion. Let my decisions reflect your wisdom, your commandments, love. Help me transform pain into purpose. Let me feel your presence. Lift me up. Hear my story. Hineni, here I am. Shana Tova, everyone. So this is a point